Recording. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. My name is Ivy Sweeting, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here this evening. I am the Assistant Executive Director of Boston Faith and Justice Network, and I will be moderating tonight's uncomfortable conversation on mass incarceration in the intersection with both racial and economic injustice. Boston Faith and Justice Network is on a mission to call and equip Christians to live just and generous lives. I come to the table with nearly 10 years of experience working with systems-involved youth, as I have shared in past panels, 7 of which I have worked on the ground very closely with gang-involved youth, young adults, and their families across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In my full-time role as the Director of Boston Reentry and the DYS Liaison for Straight Ahead Ministries, I very much find a lot of joy in the work that I'm doing with young people. However, I do certainly understand the starch realities to the justice system. As part of Boston Faith and Justice mission, nearly 2 years ago, we began this uncomfortable conversation series. In it, we seek to learn together about issues of injustice from those with lived experience, those doing the work, and those with expertise. From there, we offer ways to engage in continued learning as donors, activists, and volunteers. We at Boston Faith and Justice Network believe, as followers of Jesus Christ, that we are called to this work of justice and generosity, and we hope this series is a way that helps us all learn collectively as a community and to find ways to advance his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. As viewers may be aware, we began this series in March, speaking generally on the topic of mass incarceration, and have been digging deeper into specific sectors as the months go on, bringing us to our final conversation this evening. And before I introduce our amazing panelists, the women and pioneers that I am blessed to be here with this evening, who come to us with a wealth of knowledge, passion, experience, and expertise, I just wanted to share some general information. Of the over 9,000 people imprisoned in Massachusetts as of 2017, roughly 5 years ago, about 57% are people of color. Black residents of Massachusetts are incarcerated at almost 8 times the rate of white residents. 3 out of 5 people in US jails today have not been convicted of a crime. They cannot afford the bail, but the incarceration will be a burden long after they are free. More than 60% of the people who sit in jail at any given time have not even been convicted of crimes. They simply can't afford to buy their freedom. In a country where Black people are more likely to be poor as the result of centuries of discrimination and institutional racism, bail compounds inequities rooted in our original sin of slavery. If modern day slavery had a sound, it would be the clanking of chains as shackled people walk toward courtrooms that do not deliver justice. 10 million Americans owe more than $50 billion in criminal justice debt. The 2 largest for-profit prison companies in the United States, GEO and Corrections Corporation of America and their associates, have funneled more than $10 million to candidates since 1989 and have spent nearly $25 million on lobbying efforts. Meanwhile, these private companies have seen their revenue and market share soar. They now rake in a combined $3.3 billion in annual revenue, and the private federal prison population more than doubled between 2000 and 2010, according to a report by the Justice Policy Institute. Private companies house nearly half of the nation's immigrant detainees, compared to about 25% a decade ago, a Huffington Post report found. In total, there are now about 130 private prisons in the country with about 157,000 beds. When we think to the COVID-19 pandemic on top of the racial unrest, it requires Americans to think hard about what is injustice and disproportionate punishment. It is a question that ethicists have tried to tackle for millennia, but has been given added urgency during the pandemic as correctional facilities have become the nation's hotspots, not only due to the overcrowding, but also because of the cycling in and out of jails for low-level misdemeanor charges. There are certainly disproportionate numbers of Black and Brown mortality rates in terms of COVID-19 in prisons across the United States. Elizabeth, who is our executive director, is engaging live with our viewers on Facebook and will be providing some general information, resources, and additional links in the comment section throughout the evening. And she will also be taking questions from the audience for our panelists to answer at the end of the night. Without further ado, I want to transition to the moment in which we've all been waiting for, introducing our amazing panelists. I invite you all to remove yourself from mute and introduce yourself, by sharing where you are from, what your connection is to the issue, and what brings you or interests you about being at the table this evening. And Tawana, since you took yourself off mute first, I'll call on you.
Hi, my name is Tawana Bowles. I'm the founder of Not Your Normal Conversation. I am formerly incarcerated. And the reason why I started Not Your Normal Conversation is kind of for the same reason that we're having this conversation today. I find that a lot of people don't listen to hear, they listen to respond. They want to respond after. They don't really know the issues of being incarcerated, who's incarcerated and why. And I find that for me, the only way that we can destroy mass incarceration is by dismantling a system that wasn't designed for us to ever win. It's not a justice system, it's a legal system. And it goes against the Black and Brown community. So I'm here just to share my experience and what it's been like for me on the inside, but also on the outside, and what it looks like for me trying to help people on the inside to dismantle a system that has been broken from the very beginning, but that many people don't see as broken.
Thank you so much, Tawana. Crystal?
Hi, good evening, Ivy. Thanks for having me. My name's Crystal Johnson. I've been living and working in the Boston area for the past 30 years. I've worked at a lot of various state and local agencies and nonprofits, working with youth and their families. I've worked in child protection services. I too also worked closely on the ground with gang-involved youth during the late 90s, the so-called Boston Miracle with the Boston Street Worker Program. Currently, I'm doing individual and family therapy at a local mental health agency here in Boston. I mean, I come to this because this is, while I haven't directly worked around the issue of mass incarceration, it affects everything that I do, personally as a community member, and professionally with the families that I deal with. My father was incarcerated for a long time in my youth. I've had family members and friends that have been in jail. For a long time, I was a part of an art collective called the Blackout Arts Collective. And for 5 years in a row, we did a tour across the country called Lyrics on Lockdown. And we would go perform at agencies and facilities as well, and do writing workshops to address kind of what's going on in the prison industrial complex. I mean, we basically just have a new form of modern day chattel slavery, with, again, legal, legislative support that continues to discriminate against our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Crystal, for joining this conversation. And Pastor Val.
Good evening. Yes, so thank you for having me here. It's nice to meet Tawana and Crystal. so I just want to reference Proverbs 31:8-9 when it says, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, ensure justice for those who are being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. As believers, it's as simple as that. We are called to speak truth to power, to advocate for those who are being abused by systems, and to mitigate the harm that's being done to the most vulnerable in our community. I used to work with Department of Youth Service, particularly girls who were incarcerated. Before I started working with them, I didn't even know, I lived in Dorchester, I didn't even know there were children's lockup facilities in my neighborhood. And they're built to look innocuous and you don't even notice them. They were very subtle. And so when I got involved with doing the work and creating wraparound services for girls coming back to the community, I began to see the pipeline of kids at that time from 02124 being piped into the DYS system. One of the most heartbreaking images that I still hold is a 13-year-old pregnant girl chained, and her arms being chained and her ankles being chained. And I'm like, where's a 13-year-old pregnant girl running to? Why does she have to have shackles on her ankles and on her arms? And so incarcerated populations are invisible to us, and any opportunity we have to make them visible and to make their voices heard, we have a Christian obligation to do so. I also work as a volunteer with the Mass Bail Fund, which is another thing I learned about, is how money bail works. And doing that work, I realized that people were being held for weeks and months on as low as a $50 or $100 bail. And we've got to make these issues known. These are issues, in my opinion, there are backyard issues. They're issues that our neighbors are struggling with. There are no such thing as incarcerated individuals. We have incarcerated families, because every family member is impacted when an individual is incarcerated. So I'm here to speak out and to leverage and connect with other folks who have a heart for these issues, and to invite other people to join us as we labor for justice.
Thank you so much, Pastor Valerie. And, that makes me think of, Job 12:22, that he reveals the deep things of darkness and brings utter darkness into the light. And that's exactly what we want to do this evening. And so I will start out with various different questions, and feel free to any of you all to answer. How do structural racism, implicit bias, and white privilege impact how justice is dispensed in the US from kindergarten to adulthood?
That's a great one. That's a great question. And I mean, I guess as the only heathen on this panel, it's very evident in the school system. I mean, the education system, if you look historically, it is an exact mirror to the prison system. Even in the way the buildings are designed, you will notice that the bells, the times, the yard time, recess, right? So there's a lot of things that are already there in place to kind of continue this institutional thinking. And then, of course, all of us here are aware of the school to prison pipeline, the fact that, we have all this data from, I'm 55, so at least my lifetime of data to show that if you're getting free lunch by the 3rd grade, the odds are, the trajectory are, you're going, you know what I mean? You're going right to prison, and it's already kind of like it's pre-designated. And it's funny, I was looking over Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and I just came across this paragraph that I think is just really poignant. And she talks about, as a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a Black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America. We have merely redesigned it. So I think that's where the implicit bias and the privilege come in, because we are consistently in a world that tells us if we're not doing these kind of mainstream white things, then we are not successes in this society. And the bias becomes, as people of color, we are not even thought of, as having a role in society in some ways. We are other. So now we become expendable and collateral damage. Then it makes it easy to justify why our rights can be challenged, right? It makes it easy to justify why a person who went to jail and who's out of jail, why aren't they voting? Why is it because they're a felon? They were a felon because they were in jail, but now they're out and they're functioning in society, yet they're not given the rights that we need. I mean, imagine if some of the laws around not voting were lifted for people who have been incarcerated. The Black agenda would have advanced significantly. I am in no doubt of that. And that has been a main form of voter suppression. So I think that's how the privilege plays itself out.
Ivy, I'd like to speak to that for a minute, because is it really privilege or is it a right since the beginning of time for white people? To me, there's no such thing as white privilege. It's been their right. It's their birthright since the beginning. We are the ones that consider it a privilege because we've never been given the right. If you're speaking about schools in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, I remember being younger and being bused out to Metco, to a public school in a white area, which tells me two things. Back then, we didn't educate ourselves enough to say, hey, this is the same type of school that's in Dorchester. The books are just better, the teachers are better, and the food is better. But this is also a public school. So why aren't our children going to schools near their homes where they're getting the same education that the white Americans are getting? Again, I don't see this as white privilege. I see this as their birthright. They've had this their whole life. This is not a privilege for them. And in fact, this is the reason why they can't understand us, because it's not a privilege to them. It's something they've experienced their whole life. So they don't understand why we are having such a problem. Because,
I like that.
Because even for me in the prison system, I'm fair-skinned. And a lot of times people would question my nationality. I made sure people knew what my background was. But in fact, to some people, it seemed like I was a token Black girl because I speak what they call proper, which is not proper. It's the English language, and we should all have the right to learn it. It's not a Black thing or a white thing. It's called, I decided to pick up a book, and maybe some people didn't, including white people. I think that we have to think bigger. We're scratching the surface of what this really is. This is like Chris was saying at the retreat that we went to this weekend. This is a small thing to a giant. If we go back in history, we'll see that white people have never been privileged. They were born like this. This was their right. In schools, in the legal system, it's never been a justice system. It's just for them. It's
Right.
for them. It's never been for us. It's not just for us. Nothing is just for us. And prisons are modern day plantations. I interviewed a guy who was in Angola who was still picking cotton up until he came home on parole.
Wow.
In this day and age,
In Louisiana, right?
Who is still picking cotton? So now we have to ask ourselves, is this a privilege or is this their birthright?
it's business as well. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, if you think about it, if you really think about it, there has been nothing, we talked about, especially during the Obama administration and Trump, about, America, the importer, the exporter, and how we don't make anything. But the most things that are made in America are made in prisons. There's not nothing that we're using right now that we're wearing, where we're sitting, even the devices that we're using, that does not have prison labor attached to it. And that's, to me, the bigger picture, right? And how do we mobilize communities to understand that? Because I think in some ways, we become maladaptive. We've adapted to the notion that there is a percentage of Black people that will be in jail, right? It's for a lot of young people, all those of you DYS people, like a lot of our young people feel like it's a rite of passage. They're not going to live till they're 18. And then lo and behold, damn, they're 21. And look what happens. They're at a total loss because they're not prepared. And that's, again, that perpetuates them getting back in that slack. But I feel like what Tawana was saying, with the rights of white people and the modern slavery thing, I feel like that's exactly why none of these issues get addressed, because it is a free source of labor. There's no insurance for these employees, and companies like Marriott Corporation, Levi Strauss, all these type of big companies, Maytag, I'm sure Microsoft as well, a lot of these companies that make chips are benefiting from this free labor source and lobbying to maintain it so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there's so many different things that you all had hit on. And when you talk about, the structure of the buildings themselves, I think back to, when I first started working with the DYS population, and, our office was at the bottom of, Canterbury Street, which is one of the facilities here in Boston. And, they would always say it's facing out to a cemetery. So you're either going to be here or there. Where are you going to end up? Because those are the only choices that are presented to those that look like us.
But they never tell them that you could also be a part of the bird sanctuary that's there, right? And fly
Right.
free. They don't say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The ugliness.
So moving on to our next question. Brian Stevenson, lawyer and author of Just Mercy, has said, in the US, it is better to be rich and guilty than poor and innocent. If you agree, can you explain why and how this is true? And Pastor Valerie, I would love to hear from you.
It's absolutely true, right? When's the last time you saw a wealthy person go to jail? I mean, at the highest levels of corruption, right? We have a president who set off a coup, who actually tried to overturn the government, and he's free. He's free. We have freedom fighters who were part of the movement for Black liberation, some of whom are still incarcerated. I met Assata Shakur in Cuba. She still has to live in exile. If she comes back to this country, she will be arrested. So remembering that as we talk about race and we talk about wealth, the thing that drives America is capitalism. And the more you can profit, the better you are. So what you do is you make people, as you ladies have said, part of the labor force, so that they're not employees, they're free labor, therefore making them much more profitable to American capitalism. That's the driver. So part of it is, how do we think about people as far as a labor source, or people who have the right to hope and dream and fulfill their God-given potential, right? So those children who are sent to schools that look like prison, the statement that the government is making is we don't see a lot of potential except criminal, right? As you guys have said, every decision is intentional. Our schools look the way they look for a reason. All these things are designed intentional. If I can say that a third grader with free lunch is probably going to end up incarcerated, that information wasn't created to be fatalistic. It was created for information that has become fatalistic, because if I can say that, I can also stop it, right? If I can determine that statistically, I also can put the work in to create interventions and disruptors and divergence, right? So that doesn't have to be that way, right? But we accept it, yeah, that they'll probably end up that way. So absolutely, the idea of how wealth works in this country, wealth works as a protecting factor. As you ladies can see, if you're Black and wealthy, you could probably avoid jail, i.e. Bill Cosby, right? i.e., O.J. Simpson, super wealthy men, right? Who through their wealth have the privilege of staying out of prison, right? If they were poor, they'd be incarcerated. So not only are we talking about race, we're talking about the intersection of race and poverty, right? As we talk about incarceration, poor white people are caught up in this net that's not necessarily designed for them, but they don't have the resources to avoid it, right? You guys are absolutely right. When you have former slave population who were never intended to stay in this country, President Lincoln's plan was for us to leave the country, right? Once we were liberated, never intended to stay here. So we've always been seen as a superfluous population, a population where they've been trying to figure out what do we do with them post-slavery. It was never intended for us to stay here. So as you ladies have stated, this is not a country that was built for us. It was built by us, for others, right? And so the fight has been for us to say, hey, my blood is in the soil. This is my country. And to recognize that our people are human and entitled to all the rights that humanity affords. As a matter of fact, the original civil rights movement was not a civil rights movement. It was a movement for humanity. And they had to change it to civil rights movement, right? Because they were going to actually bring international charges against the United States for its treatment of African Americans. So the fight for us has always been to demand that we be treated with every human concern that everyone else gets, right? And to say that our children have the right to flourish, to be seen as people who have amazing potential, and to not have that killed through systems that are designed to direct them into incarceration. So absolutely, wealth plays a part in this, even in getting into incarceration, right? So we're talking about incarcerated people, but the bail system, money bail system drives mass incarceration. So when I have my Freedom All t-shirt on that comes with Mass Bail Fund, but when I would go and post bail for people, and I might go over to South Bay or something like that, and I might post bail for 8, 9, 10 people. These people have $50, $75, $100 bails, okay, that they can't make. And they're sitting in incarceration for weeks and months. Now, keep in mind that it's costing probably $10,000 a week to keep them there on a $200 bail. So that tells you that they're more valuable incarcerated than they are out in society. So we have created an inverted system that finds people more valuable behind bars because there's a whole lot of money to be made. And, once you build it, you got to fill it. There's a whole lot of jobs tied to this system.
That's right.
Probation, court system, magistrates, clerks, people who work in the kitchen, people who clean the prison, people, correction officers. There's a whole lot of employment tied to these systems. In fact, a lot of these poor towns want prisons because they don't have industry and they don't have other ways to make a living. So we have created a really, it's not a far-fetched system, as you guys have stated. The country was established on slavery. Mm-hmm. So by the time the country is born, comes to be 1776, it has already had a slavery system in place for 150 years. So the United States is born out of slavery. And so the incarceration of volumes of people or chaining volumes of people for labor is what this country knows. So this stuff, as you guys say, it's not accident, it's designed this way. So I would really love for us in Massachusetts to take on at least just one issue that we can put some pressure on, even if it's the bail system. If we can fight money bail and not have people losing their jobs, their housing, their children behind $150 bail, and also understanding that a lot of what's driving these arrests are misdemeanor charges. Okay, these are not even serious charges. In addition to that, we're having people incarcerated, and there's research that shows. I looked at the statistics. Say 40% of people, on average, 40% of people have $400 in the bank, right? 40%. So for somebody to come up with $100, $150, that's a lot of money for some families. For people who have not been found guilty of anything, nothing. So we do not get the presumption of innocence as Black people, as poor people. Say that. Right? So really beginning to put some pressure on this money bail system, I think would really help keep people out of jail, because what happens is people end up pleading guilty to get out of jail because they cannot sit in a cell in detention for 6 months. Okay, yeah. So you end up pleading to something you didn't even do, and now you get out, and now you belong to who? Probation.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Conversation that was just having with, one of my colleagues earlier, especially when it comes to our young people, and, they're not understanding what all this terminology means and, what is going to come of that, but the trauma, and the fear that is placed on them and that, is perpetuated in these systems takes over, in those moments. And, Tawana, I see you're bubbling to say something.
No, I'm going to put my hands under Pastor Valerie's feet and I'm going to hold her up, because I think that in our community, especially, we have a hard time doing that, because it's a natural fear that we have, that if we speak out, we won't be heard. See, Ayanna Presley made a good point. I was at an event with her and she said, we all have voices. We all can be heard. We're just ignored. And in fact, what Pastor Valerie is saying is that we have to disarm the system with education. We have to dismantle the system, and the only way to do that is to become educated. We cannot just sit on our hands. And by the way, Ms. Johnson, I voted. And I was interviewing some Boston City councilors and decided to go out with them in the community just to see how they collected signatures, because I am in the community. So I'm out there trying to figure it all out, trying to make it make sense. And I happened to stop in the middle of the street and say to this brother, can I ask you a question? Did you vote? And he goes, I can. I'm a convicted felon. And I go, me too. But I voted.
Right.
So we have to stop making excuses. We have to stop complaining at our dinner table and making small talk and pillow talk about what needs to be done in the community. And like she said, arm ourselves to disarm the system.
Right.
Because if we don't have enough education, we're never going to win. They're going to keep standing on our backs until they suffocate us or they break our back. And for me, honestly, I'm tired of that.
Right.
Enough is enough already. How much more of this do we have to take? And our kids shouldn't have to fight this fight.
Right.
We are armed with some things, and we need to come out swinging. And it doesn't have to be a physical fight. This is what they don't want us to do. They don't want us to become educated. Like Pastor Valerie said, when we disarm them, it's almost as if we're holding up physical guns to them. They have nowhere to go.
Right.
But we haven't done that yet. What we've done is we've talked about it at our kitchen table. We've come in a circle and we discussed it, but we've done nothing about it. At this point, it's all hands and feet and arms and everything on deck. And it's time for us to stand on each other's shoulders and be heard. We all have voices. It's being heard. We're not being heard because we're not being forceful enough. We will stand outside of a Nike store and buy Jordans and stay there sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning to buy those sneakers.
Right.
We stand in front of the State House and make a statement.
Right.
Just get arrested for with trespassing or whatever. I'm down.
Right. And that's it, the mobilization efforts. And I mean, it does go back to education. And I think that it's complex, but it's simple, right? It's threefold, because we have 2 generations of kids that have educated themselves to a different way, and their experiences are very different, right? So as Ivy said, you got on the one hand people that get involved in the criminal system, that they're petrified, they're traumatized, whatever. But then you have another facet of kids that's like, oh, I got a paid lawyer. I got to do, they feel like, oh, I got this paid lawyer. But what does that mean, right? You don't even know how to tell your lawyer to work for you because you don't understand. Or taking it to the level where you're re-educating these people who are felons, like, there's things that you can do to correct that. But it's really, how do we inspire our people to have the tenacity to go through those things? Because right now, in my mind, me having a pair of Nikes is going to signify the world that I come up. Me standing in front of the State House doesn't show the world that I come up, right? And that's a mentality that we have to break, of what is the status. Because I feel a lot of times people don't get involved because we have been institutionalized, we have internalized. We feel that our equality comes from mirroring what these white people are doing, right? Across the board, I think, you know what I mean, in my experience, because we're not taught. My mother used to always say, imagine if all the plumbers, the dentists, the lawyers didn't leave the hood to go to these suburban towns and suburban schools, but they stayed in our community. And she was like, we never taught people, and we never taught, she was the first generation to be educated after Brown versus the Board of Education. So she would always say, we would teach Black people, we would teach our kids to work harder, to be better, but not to be comfortable being Black. So I see a lot of what we go through, and a lot of people kind of ignoring these situations and not mobilizing, because we're trying to ascribe to an ideal that doesn't apply to us. So it makes it easy for people to ignore. So it makes it easy for the Black person who's like, I've never been arrested before, to say to someone else, well, they deserve to go to jail because of this, this, and this, right? And I mean, that's kind of where I see where we're at. There's not, to me, a lot of localized national leadership, right? So, and I think that speaks to, we don't know, I mean, you guys may know, and I may know some things because of our own work, but in general, organizations in Atlanta don't know what's happening with organizations in Boston, Detroit, right? New York City, we don't have that connection. Even in small Black communities like in Wichita, St. Louis, we don't know what other groups are doing. So we need, that's part of, I think, what Pastor Valerie, means as well, is educating people to mobilize, because we do have the power. Like, there's no one here or no one on this conversation that needs any more stats. We read them, we live them on the day-to-day. We don't need that. We need solution. We need voices. We need our young people to come out and speak up. We need more women who have been incarcerated to come and speak up, since they have been, I think it's 300% in the past 5 years. 300% increase in women that have been incarcerated, or the notion of let's give the females. I remember I used to do stuff at DYS, and this is when I really knew. This was when I was doing lyrics on lockdown, and I just really saw the insidiousness of the situation. So the Harvard Street facility, which is now a female facility, but was a boys facility, but then they built a brand new one on Canterbury Street for the boys, slapped some paint on the Harvard Street one. Now the girls are there. Even that, I mean, the sexism in that, like, you know what I'm saying? Even that is like, what is going on with our folks? It's crazy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go on that tangent.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. This conversation.
I'm passionate about it because, this racism issue, it is not going anywhere. If anything, it's getting worse. And honestly, the Black people that can, we need to arm ourselves and rise up, because that's what it's about. When I say arm ourselves, I don't necessarily mean with weapons.
Information.
Information, reamassing our power. I'm a firm believer in the people, power to the people, because the people got the power. And if we shut down, imagine if we boycotted, just organizing boycotts. That would be a start. Organizing national boycotts, getting some of these other agencies together, being like, you know what, Marriott, you're selling stuff, you're selling soap to the prison. Well, let's start boycotting Marriott. Which would be hard because that's like the Black People Copley Hotel, right? You come up if you go to the Marriott, but imagine what that would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think that's why it's so important to us, at Boston Faith and Justice Network, to call and equip Christians to do this work, because it takes a village, to raise a young person, but it takes all of us coming together, utilizing our voices to be able to make that difference, and not just, sitting idly by and watching, these things happen around us. And I feel like this conversation has been so fruitful. I've lost track of where I am in my questions.
I just wanted to add one more thing too, as I said,
go ahead.
As the heathen non-Christian on this panel, it is refreshing to see the church taking, a voice in the stand, because, when I was growing up, it kind of was, you would kind of want to help those people, but it was more like, these people are sinning, they need guidance, blah, 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 which some of that may be true, but to really look at it from the political perspective, because when churches do that too, that makes them vulnerable, because, they're looked at in some ways institutionally, they're the ones that keep us in line, right? We shall overcome. It will be religion that keep us. So for churches to really start getting it and to make that shift politically to advocacy, I think that sends a good message too.
Absolutely.
As the pastor on the on the call, I definitely want to respond to that. I think, what we're talking about is the intersection of class, race, and capitalism. If I'm Black and I have means, I can avoid some of the pitfalls that have been set up for me, right? I still might get caught in them, but I'm probably less likely, and I might have the means to sort of get out of it, right? We don't talk enough about class, right? Because the impact on poor Blacks versus upper middle class Blacks is very different. We all have to deal with the myth of white supremacy and the institutions that are created to protect and reinforce white supremacy. But we can mitigate the impact if we are in particular socioeconomic class structures, right? I can send my kid to a private school. I can send my kid away. I can move away. But we're talking about the intersection of poverty and class, where people are trapped socioeconomically, can't move away. They can't have school choice. They can't move to a different neighborhood that has less drama, less this, less that, right? So I think it's important for us to always remember when we're talking about race, we have to also talk about class. When Boston desegregated the schools in the 1970s, that class action suit was brought by upper middle class Blacks, right? Whose kids did not have to ride those buses into South Boston, into Charlestown, and face the danger and the harm, okay? So, so keeping in mind that this is also about, and I said also capitalism, right? So the issue when you talk about, I'd rather, I wait in line for my sneakers and this, that, and the other thing. And so if one of the ways that you can squash an uprising is to give people stuff. Okay? Because then what happens is people are then more focused on keeping and protecting their stuff.
Right. The shiny
and not taking risk or speaking out or doing things that's going to cause them to lose their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So even in the city of Boston, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, there was a great, and you know this, Crystal, because you talked about the 1990 something Boston Miracle, blah, blah, blah.
It was a lie.
So here's the thing. We saw the partnership and the collaboration with the Black church in Boston and the city and the police.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm in a press conference in a photo op with the mayor, and I'm going to galas with the mayor, and I'm being called by the mayor, I'm much less likely to speak out against the injustices that are happening in the city, because at some point I become a protector of the mayor, because I don't want to not be called to the press conference. I do not want to not be called for the gala. Right. I want to be the pastor whose name is on the list.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? So let's understand how power works, how some people get invited into proximity to power.
Right.
And I might not have a lot of power, but if I'm in proximity to power,
right,
I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that.
Right. If you're power adjacent. And I'm so glad that you said that, because, I used to hate when they would say that, because a miracle was not what I was experiencing on the front lines, right? And this miracle, clearly you see, was not a miracle at all, because it did not work. The only miracle maybe is that a few people benefited because of those connections from that, right? A few maybe, a few individuals along the way benefited from those collaborations. Mm-hmm. But I think that you hit it on the nail. We have to be willing to say what we'll give up, to want to say, yeah, I'll get arrested for trespassing. And,
First, it's not going to bother me any at this point. I with the pastor, no, I'm serious. You just preached a whole sermon there that everyone, this is serious. Right. Like we do not take this serious enough. And at the end of the day, I do not want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be respected. And I want to go somewhere and have somebody sign a law in my face that is going to work for me and my community. I don't care about going to and I decline a lot of things. I don't want to be seen by anybody. In fact, I said to Ivy the other day I said, I think I need to save up some more money, because I'm probably going to be found in contempt of court my first year out of law school. I'm going to school to be a juvenile defense attorney, and don't think that I'm going to be shutting up, because I'm not. And it's probably not going to happen. I'm probably going to end up incarcerated. So, honey, if you're listening, get my bail money ready, because no one's playing.
No, you ain't going to jail. It sounds like you'll be able to defend yourself out of it. No, I mean, this conversation is,
and I agree with Pastor Valerie. In fact, we want to be seen so bad that we're willing to take away from what our initial agenda was, which is the fight.
Exactly.
To sit on the sideline.
Well, there's also the grants you know, the money that's tied to this, you support me on this. I mean, that when I was involved in that, there was a lot of that, you know, support me on this, we'll get you this grant money. And
Mhm.
then, you know, the politics that go with this. And, you know, I think Pastor Valerie with the class and race, like for me, I don't really distinguish, because for me that the racism umbrella kind of oversees that, because I feel like the racism is affecting the classism. And even though there are poor whites who are going through a lot of the same things that we go through, they are still unable in a mass level to intersect and connect their experience. I mean, we have people now that, you know, part of the insurrection being called political prisoners. Are you kidding me? Leonard Pelletier is a political prisoner. Mumia Abu Jamal is a political prisoner. You know what I'm saying? You guys are you are criminals, but they cannot even align themselves with that. You know, going to jail, like thinking that they're gonna get all these privileges, being mad because, like, yeah, now you see you're getting treated just like everybody else. And you know, I'm sure a lot of the black CEOs that are in that DC prison, they're probably like having a field day with some of these people, which is unfortunate, right? That, you know, the cruelty that comes out sometimes. But I mean, I think that these conversations need to keep being had. We need to keep forcing them. We need to maybe, like I said, connect nationally with other people in these communities that are having these conversations to bring that attention, because we need to coalesce. You know, part of, you know, I feel a lot of times in our community, especially with a lot of the younger generations after us, it's like if they see other people doing it, they'll do it, right? If it's lit, they'll be there, right? So it's like we need to light it for them, you know, to make it lit, because they are getting affected and they see it. I work in a middle school. The kids see the things that happen, but they don't have the information and the vocabulary to describe it, to deal with the emotions, to deal with the trauma around it. I mean, we didn't even touch on the trauma. Like, you know, I think, why does this have to be the last one? We need to do some more every month.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm looking at the time like, wow, it's 7:52 and this conversation is just so fruitful, you know, and I'm thinking of, you know, what is next, because it doesn't end here. And how do we continue those conversations? You know, I'm hearing the threads of, you know, education, utilizing our voice, coming together as community. And so, you know, to wrap up the conversation, I want to ask each of you all, you know, what do you foresee, or what is your call to action to the community, our viewers, those watching, that we can continue in doing this work?
Uh-oh, I feel like we're in like Jeopardy or something. I'm like, is someone going to say something?
And anybody can go first. There's no specific order.
Well, you know, as I said when I first met you, you know, I grew up in the system. I was taken away from my mother at a very early age. I was only 5. So systems I felt were normal. And I think that there's other people out there like me who don't understand that the systems weren't made for us. And although we may see them as normal, they're not. Especially not for the Black and Brown community. There's no health, there's no wealth, there's no spirituality, there's no mental stability in a system. But unfortunately, because of how I grew up, I thought that that system was for me. It must have been made for me, otherwise they would have never put me there. So, you know, me going to law school, even though I'm formerly incarcerated, I found that I was not doing myself a justice by continuing to go back there, that I needed to not just fight this fight and just say, I'm going to get out and I'm going to fight. But again, I needed to arm myself with education, with information, but also lived experience for me. Sometimes is the best teacher. You know, I was telling somebody, I'm probably going to be a damn good attorney because I've lived this. And so to fight for somebody who's on the other side, it feels different for me. And yeah, I'll probably take a lot of this home to bed with me, but I know at the end of the day, I can't give up. I gave birth to Not Your Normal Conversation because conversations like this are not normal in the Black and Brown community, and they are uncomfortable. So I'll continue to do this. I'll continue to invite people like Pastor Valerie on my show. You're up next, Pastor Valerie. There's something to be said, because I was just on a Zoom call last week speaking out about how the churches need to become more involved in mass incarceration. And what does that look like? And here you are. God just put you right on my lap so that we can have more of these conversations, because I won't give up until I take my last breath, until I take a dirt nap. This is where I'm going to be. I'm more valuable on the outside than on the inside. So I plan to fight this fight because I can.
Amen. Amen. And I thank you for your voice, your power, and everything that you are doing, that you stand for. And I'm standing right there with you because, we just, met recently, but I know the power of God and what he has planned in store for the both of us. So thank you so much.
And I'm a Christian, so I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord, and I'm ready to fight anybody. Better than one. You better
Amen.
come on, C. Johnson. Come on over. Come on over.
Yeah, I'm a soldier in the army of the universe. You know what I'm saying? And a warrior for my people.
Well, it's all right with me. God tells me to love everybody, and I love you, and it's all right.
Yeah, of course. And I think that as you stated, until I take a dirt nap, I will keep doing this. I mean, this is how I grew up. My mom was a teen mom when she had me. And at a time when you went down south and came back with your cousin, or your mom had your new sister or brother. And I watched her in some ways break a cycle. And so, she graduated high school, went to college, went to graduate school, and at the time of her death was studying for her PhD. So I often use that story when I'm doing my family therapy to break the cycle. And that's what I will encourage people to do. And that's what I encourage them to do in my sessions with them, is to give them the tools to educate themselves, to advocate for themselves, and to break as much of the cycle as you can, because systems benefit systems, right? A system is in place for that reason, for its own livelihood, its own life source. If an individual benefits, that is not intended. It's just a welcome serendipitous event. And we have to have an understanding of that, and educate people to that, to the institutionalization and the systemic things around us that, I work in a school. So in some ways I'm part of the system. Mm-hmm. How I cannot be a part of it is to make sure that I'm letting the students know what time it is, right? Being real with them, not coddling them, not letting them engage in negative behaviors because I'm uncomfortable with it, not letting them call each other nigger in the classroom because I'm uncomfortable with redirecting them, right? So those are some of the things that I will continue to do with my clients. And as always, advocacy in education is always a part of what I do. And it's the main part of how I do my therapy with clients, and, working with keeping families together. I have a lot of families where people are just coming home, and just getting readjusted to what's going on. Because if you've been locked up for 10 years or more, you probably have a very limited idea of how things work. Social media, it's a whole new world. So, really trying to get those folks back on track. Come on, we need you.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, and I think it might have been Pastor Valerie that had, stated earlier, that it's not just the individual, that's incarcerated. It plays a domino effect on the family and the community as a whole. And that's why it is important for us to have these conversations. And Pastor Valerie, I'll let you have your last word as well.
No, I want to say, Tawana, I am psyched to be on your show. So call me anytime. I'd be honored. I would say, you know, I think we have to keep people out of prison, keep them out, and um, looking at how to fix money bail, looking at how to keep police officers out of our schools, looking at how to replace police officers with social workers. It's the same money. It's
Right.
the same money. If we can shift the money from resource officers, i.e. police officers, and put social workers in the schools. Our kids' behavior, normal behavior that all kids have, developmental stuff, stress, all kinds of responding to their environment. That stuff is criminalized for our kids. Versus seen as children. I mean, that's research that shows that that white people don't see our kids as children.
Right.
So it's very easy to put handcuffs on a 5-year-old.
Yep.
You don't see that as a child.
Yeah.
Right? So I think I would love for us to put more resources on keeping people out of that system. We can do what we can to mitigate how evil that system is. But it's a bad system, right? Nobody's going in there coming out the same.
Yeah, for sure.
Nobody. And I also think maybe we need to start sort of separating out our approach, right? That we have people who are working on the front end to keep people out of jail. We have people who are working on how to help people get more humane treatment while they're in jail. And then we have people working on how to help people re-enter into society. Those are three different sort of phases that people experience when they are caught up in the carceral system.
Right.
So, I just, and you know what, I'm just gonna say, we got to give our people a little bit of a break. We've been here 400 years, and we have survived hundreds of years of chattel slavery, Jim Crow, lynching, and we just got the Civil Rights Act 50 years ago. Okay, so this is brand new. So I think we gotta give our people a little bit of a break. And I think also that as we talk about our youth, look, when we talk about the kids talking about the nigger word, right? That was a big debate when I was, but let's remember who promotes what type of music.
Right. Yeah.
When I was growing up, there was a variety of hip hop. There was MC Lyte, there was Queen, there was Sister Soldier, there was Public Enemy. There were a lot of voices.
Yeah.
There were a lot of political voices. Explain to me why those political voices are not there.
That's right.
Because if you can keep people not free in their mind,
that's right.
Not free. So you allow a particular type of music that shapes how people see themselves and how they see each other, which makes it much easier for them to shoot and kill each other.
Yes.
Because they are listening to this type of music that was designed for a particular outcome while corporations get wealthy. So let's remember, this stuff is by design. And so let's be a little bit more merciful with one another. It's an ugly system. So
it sure is.
I just want to I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we can go on for hours, especially with this group, and I was looking forward to this, and I'll just say, maybe I'm a little biased, but I was, very thankful, to have this final conversation with such powerful women, because there's not a lot of women like us that will stand up for the fight, and, that will hear our voices and make sure that our voices are heard. Right. And so I, personally thank each and every one of you for your voice, for your time, for your dedication to this work, and for all of our viewers that are tuning in with us this evening. I'll say, Boston Faith and Justice Network is a nonprofit. So if you would like to support us, please go to our website for further information and how to do so, and to subscribe to our newsletter as well. We didn't plan out another conversation after this, but I feel one percolating in the midst right now. So please stay in tune for, upcoming events, conversations, and resources. And I will just close us out with a quote and a prayer. As Danielle Koch said, "We were created to do good work that empowers and inspires, liberates and transforms, restores and softens. Yes, work can be hard, as it was meant to be. The verb itself calls us to action, rejecting passivity and demanding sustained effort. It provokes, agitates, and disturbs. But this work, the call for justice, is good work. It defends the oppressed and frees the captive. It tears down walls and destroys barriers. It changes things. So when you are feeling weary or hopeless or spent, remind yourself that the darkness is being flooded by marvelous light. Yes, this is work and it is good." Oh, gracious and heavenly Father, I just thank you for this time, for this hour, for everything that you are doing in and through every single one of us. I thank you for the power of our voices, for your daughters, for your children, Lord, that we all come together and continue to fight the good fight, Lord, equipped with everything that you give us, Lord, your knowledge, your education, your wisdom, and your discernment. We know that you are a just God. And when we ask for anything, that we shall receive it from you. So I just thank you for everything that you have given us, Lord. We know that we all have gifts and we all have a part to play in this multifaceted puzzle and system that has been built, against us, but no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Lord, we love you. I thank you for this conversation, this time, and everything that you are doing. In Jesus' name, amen.
And beautiful meeting you, sisters. I hope to see you guys in person one day.
Yeah, that would be
Yes.
lovely. I really enjoyed your words, both of you, and meeting you, and knowing that you're in the community
Yes.
as well. So maybe we will break bread again. Maybe we'll have a follow-up conversation. Oh, you said we will? Listen, I would love to talk with you about the law thing. I would love to chat with you.
Yes.
To get you guys' phone number once she turns that thing off.
Okay.
Yes. So good night, everybody on Facebook.
Night.
Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you. Have a great night.
All right.
Right.